excited to talk through this email that I just received from Claude and the new Claude Cowork setup. A little bit late to the game, but hey. So, what I wanted to do, because I know Cowork is quite an overwhelming, or can be seen as quite an overwhelming task and area of Claude, in particular for non-technical folks like myself. For a while, I just operated in chat, and I realized that that wasn't actually super ideal because Cowork is really great for working alongside Claude and starting to integrate Claude into your systems a bit more effectively, actually quite a lot more effectively than chat can. And so Claude just dropped a task essentially where you can run this setup dash cowork and get a guided setup to using Claude Cowork. Now, I was just going to write an article on Cowork 101, and what I wanted to do first, before I did that, is explore how Claude thinks about almost Cowork 101. I would think that this would be Claude's equivalent to a 101 article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through setting it up on my Claude. Now, just as a disclaimer, I obviously have used Claude for a while and have obviously used Cowork for a while now. So my setup might not look the same as yours. I did want to try it on my other fake account, which is my personal email, which has absolutely no context, but it's a paid plan and I can't pay twice. So I am going to try it on my work account to see how that works, and we're going to go through it together to see how well Claude does. And depending on that, I might write a Claude Cowork 101 anyways, because I feel like there might be things that are missed, or there might be some nuances when it comes to being a non-technical person, because a lot of these things are set up for devs. And so let's dive in. Before we do, I am running a free lightning lesson on Claude agents slash plugins, because there's like a word for everything these days. And it's on September 9th for about 30 minutes. It's completely free. There are 100 and some odd people signed up so far. So if you want to join me in that, it will be a run through of what agents actually are. So what they are versus skills, and how to use them in your workflow when it makes sense, when it doesn't. So an overview of that, because I know agents are talked about a lot, also in a lot of different ways. So I wanted to clarify how I use agents for user research. So if you want to join me in that, I would absolutely love it. So let's dive in to setting up Cowork. So what I did is I did the slash command of setup Cowork. That's literally just slash commanding, and you would get that. So all you have to do is set that up. So what it did is it did read through me. So, I do have a profile. So there is some memory in here of what I am. So I'm a user research educator and strategist. And there are memory preferences. So writing in my own voice. And what it has done is it has come up with a checklist. So this is the checklist that it goes through, and it asks me questions in order to get that going. So yes, it's just getting us set up now. So interestingly, it knows that I'm a founder and work in user research, but it's asking me what kind of research that I do, or what kind of work I do. Not in here. So user experience researcher, can't even spell my own profession, consultant and trainer. So there we go. Even though it has, already asked me that, it might have timed out. It's having a hard time right now. There we go. Cool. So it has my installed plugins, which I'm not really sure why it's telling me this. So this is actually agents. These are my agents that are already on my account, and they cover user research. And then it's pulling up connectors. So connectors are essentially tools that plugins can use. So let's say for analysis and synthesis, you might want to connect directly to Miro within a plugin so that it can actually do things in Miro on your behalf. So that's kind of what it is essentially asking me to do now. Suggest plugins, suggest connectors, try a skill. Okay, so suggest plugins. Let's see, can you suggest a new plugin? Let's see, for me, because that's what it's supposed to do. But it's just saying that I've already done that. So let's see if we can force it into ignoring everything that no, I don't want it to do that. Okay, supposedly I'm trying to trick it into ignoring everything and imagine that we're setting things up for the first time. So we're going to try this again. User experience, research, consultant, and trainer. So let's see if it helps me with this now properly. So we've started over and we'll see if it will let me ignore some of the plugins. So here we go. So now it is ignoring my plugins, kind of, although it says already installed. So plugins for user research, consulting, and training. So an intake planning, a scoping, and an analysis and synthesis. So this is what it is recommending is these particular ones. Let's try and push it a little bit further. Do you have another plugin you would recommend for user research consultancy specifically? See if I could just force it to see what it actually comes up with when it suggests plugins rather than suggesting my own that I've already created. Okay, cool. Here we go. It's actually suggesting plugins now, which is nice. Now, again, plugins are an amalgamation of multiple skills. So skills do one particular task, whereas plugins have multiple skills. So it's a multi-step process. So rather than if you look at user research intake, rather than just creating an intake document in one skill, this plugin allows you to do like several skills at once. Let me see if I can just easily manage it. Right, so as you can see here, there are several skills, well, quite a few skills in here. So each of these skills is one task. Putting it into a plugin allows for you to do multi-steps, so multiple tasks within one working session. And what this is aimed to do is to help with processes that are longer than one particular task. And so you can have agents and sub-agents running alongside each other doing these tasks, making it more efficient. It's a very pretty concept. It doesn't always work. So you do have to think through still within the context of plugins which skills make sense to give to AI because we can't just relinquish our entire process because AI is not great at every single research task. So it's about understanding, okay, which tasks are good to give to AI, what like mechanical tasks are good, and can we have several of those mechanical tasks in one particular plugin. So let's see. These are not helpful because I've already created these. But let's go ahead with influence and impact because that's quite an important topic for us. So let's do user research, influence and impact. Sure. Let's do user research, influence and impact. So it's suggested plugins. And now it's looking at connectors. So again, connectors are tools that Claude can talk to directly. There are different ways that Claude can talk to. Sometimes it can only read things, which means that it can almost only view things. And it can also write things, which means that it can edit or create things within these different tools. And it's up to you to set up how much Claude can do within these given tools. So you might have certain things where you only want it to read, whereas you might have certain tools where you want it to do things on your behalf, so create or edit things on your behalf. So as you see here, these are connectors that I have. So connectors that could help: Notion, Slack, SurveyMonkey. So the three above are gaps. So Notion matters most for this plugin since the repository taxonomy skill assumes somewhere to file insights. Slack is where impact tracking picks up what stakeholders did with your research, and SurveyMonkey feeds the ROI numbers. Interesting. So how does Survey see? This is why I'm like, what does that mean? Because in none of this is there actually anything that it's connecting us to that makes sense for something like, I would think actually that one of the connectors that it should suggest, I mean, I guess it's already like Google Drive, so it could create a Google Sheets for me that helps me, like a dashboard that helps me with tracking ROI. Yeah, SurveyMonkey doesn't. The ROI works off of business metrics. Those come from analytics and product tooling, not a survey platform. Imagine that. Yeah, okay. So this is why I'm happy that I'm doing this, because this doesn't make any sense. SurveyMonkey, like, to be fair, like SurveyMonkey can give you numbers because you're sending a survey to people. So it can be helpful, but when it comes to influence and impact, it's not actually, well, maybe it could be helpful to a degree, but we're talking about business metrics here, and showcasing the change in business metrics. So let's try look for an analytics connector, and then we'll try a skill and see what is actually working here. Okay, so yeah, great. So it is actually thinking through amplitude, which is great, mixed panel, which is great because if you do have product analytics, they could be sat in those. So this is where context, it just showcases how important context is, because I've told Claude that I'm a user experience researcher, and it's been like SurveyMonkey, whereas if I was working with a company that used a different survey tool, that obviously wouldn't be very helpful. So context is key here. In terms of connectors, I guess maybe what it could do for you is if you haven't connected some of the more like basic connectors, so such as like a transcription tool, such as Google Drive, or your email, your calendar, then that might be interesting and that might be helpful for you to set up. But when it comes to some of the other connectors, I think maybe what they could do is just give you ideas, but I don't think that they are necessarily going to be on point, because a lot of people don't use Notion for repositories. Slack, yes, it's pointless for me to have Slack because I only join it every once in a while. And SurveyMonkey could be interesting if you have a survey platform, but this isn't helpful if you don't run your surveys on SurveyMonkey. So I guess from here, what it could do is it could give you ideas of what you could connect, but I don't think it's going to be super on point unless you give it all the context, which is essentially giving it all the tools that you have that you could connect to, which you could do on your own, which then feels like it's not actually setting anything up for you. So yeah, we have amplitude and mixed panel here, which could be very interesting. So if you do have those, what it would do is essentially it would connect to, I mean, I can pretend to connect where, yeah, let's see. So what it will do is it will try to get you to connect to it. Yeah, great. Awesome. Unfortunately, I don't have an amplitude. Yeah. So it will get you to sign into your org's URL. And essentially what it does is it connects Claude directly to Amplitude or this other tool, so that you can query Claude. So you can ask Claude a question so that it can go into Amplitude, find that information for you, and bring it back rather than you going into Amplitude and finding that. So you'll see that there are some examples here. So looking at conversion funnels, right? User retention, let's say, and then these are the tools, uh, which is interesting. I don't know if they mean skills, but these are things that you can obviously command them to do. So yeah, getting a particular dashboard, looking at querying a data set. So that's quite interesting. And then you have related connectors here, right? So Zapier, HubSpot, Monday, all good connectors that you could consider having if this is if these are important to you. And I do recommend, so something that actually is really interesting is that it didn't bring up like something like Miro, but I guess since we're talking about like influence and impact, it's not going to as much because Miro is like a really cool connector to use when it comes to Claude because you can have it start to use your synthesis to create essentially affinity diagrams for you, which I find really interesting and helpful because a lot of the times it's really time consuming to put together these affinity diagrams and it can start that for you. Of course, you need to check up on it. Of course, you need to tell it how to do it. And of course, we need to double check, but it can start to form something for you at least. So that you are going in and you can do like that first pass. So I would recommend connectors. I have an article on different types of connectors, MCPs, that I do recommend for researchers. But this would be contextual to your organization or information that or tools that you use essentially. So these are the tools that I tend to use the most. So let's try a skill and please ignore the ones because I have so many I already have. And let's create a new one for impact and influence on user research projects. I don't want to give it too much because that's like probably not necessarily what people would do. So let's try this skill. I don't want to try a skill. I don't want to try any of these. It's trying really hard. Sure, no, I don't want to. Let's create a research, influence, and impact skill. Let me just try and see if like we can force it to do this rather than it going with whatever. Okay. I hate when it doesn't listen to me. Okay, so here we go. This might be what it is trying to do anyway. So trying a skill. Uh, hopefully it would actually, yeah. Okay, I do have a skill builder skill in here. I use a research skill builder skill. That will help. I can link to that actually because it can be quite helpful. So I need to understand what you actually mean by influence and impact. So it's asking me questions to get this out. So what task should this skill handle? Um, let's say quarterly, this is quite interesting, impact report for my teams and organization. Just gonna remember these so that it doesn't get confused. I never know what actually confuses or not. What context does it apply to? Let's say this applies to a researcher at an organization doing research for team. What do you always include? Okay, so this is the thing about making skills. You can't make skills without context, or it will just make stuff up and be really dumb. So, what I would probably do in this point is dig out my impact framework, which I can do in just 1 second. But this just goes to show again how important it is. So if I don't tell it what to do, it's going to make something up. And whenever I have left Claude to its own devices, it's not made up good stuff. Let me tell you that. So I would probably need to pull out my impact framework, which would show it what I always include. Which, if you're new to this, is I understand that that's kind of a bummer because you're kind of like, well, I wanted it to help me with this. Now, we could try and get it to help us with this. I could try and query it to help me with like building something like this together. So, yeah, maybe I'll try that in lieu of pulling up my own frameworks. Can you help me build a framework for this and what we should include, as well as what we should never include? So that includes four. And then just gonna copy the output would be a stakeholders on a team, such as product managers, designers, devs, product, head of product, VP of product, let's say those. And let's see if it can help us build an impact framework together within this skill, because yeah, it's quite important, because again, like if you don't have frameworks that you're already utilizing for these things, so if you're kind of like, oh great, you can help me build this impact skill without any context, it you will struggle with that, because it does need something, like essentially it's asking for your brain. So it's ideal if you give it as much context as possible, which again can be quite annoying if you're wanting to do this from scratch and build this, or like almost like get an answer or suggestion. So what it has done is